Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman. Paris Schutz has the evening off. On the show tonight,
there are a couple of matters that are hanging up the proceedings right now.
Negotiations for a massive energy bill are underway in Springfield. We'll talk about its outlook with state lawmakers. Another controversial pipeline is proposed, this one in a village near Kankakee. A look at why some farmers are concerned. We're off to the races at Arlington Park, a close-up at the racecourse's reopening guidelines amid its murky future.
If an earlier era of space exploration was driven by competition, this one will be defined by collaboration.
What a permanent human presence on the moon could look like. An effort to make Chicago's e-scooter program permanent hits a pothole.
Today is 259 straight days in Lake Michigan.
And that number has since grown to 365 days. Meet the Great Lake Jumper. But first, some of today's top stories. Another violent night in Chicago. 4 people were killed and 8 others shot at a house party on South Morgan in Inglewood. The shooting reportedly started after an argument. Tuesday's early morning shooting is Chicago's second mass shooting in just 4 days. Here's what the mayor had to say today about the violence.
The reality is our city is safe, and I stand by that. We have done yeoman's work over the course of a very difficult year where every major city, New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Washington, D.C., Atlanta, and on and on and on the list goes, have seen a similar surge in violence. And it is distressing.
A groundbreaking report on the health of black Chicagoans is released by the city's public health department, and the findings are startling. CDPH says the life expectancy gap between black and non-black Chicagoans is 9.2 years and rising. The report also shows the homicide rate among blacks is 9 times higher. The diabetes-related death rate is 70% higher for black residents. Black infants are almost 3 times as likely to die in their first year of life. Blacks accounted for half of the people living with HIV, and the death rate for opioid-related overdoses among blacks is more than 3 times the rate among non-blacks. And now to Amanda Vinicky with a rundown of news out of Springfield. Amanda.
Brandis, state lawmakers are back in Springfield this week to complete unfinished business from their regular session. An energy bill, legislation for an elected school board in Chicago, and a measure related to firearm owners' identification cards. Now, the Senate met today. The House is in tomorrow. And joining us now with more are State Senator Michael Hastings, a Democrat representing parts of Tinley Park, State Representative Ann Williams, a Democrat representing parts of Chicago, State Representative David Welter, he's Republican, representing parts of LaSalle and Will counties, and State Senator Jason Plummer, a Republican representing parts of Southern Illinois. Now, Senator Hastings, the Senate brought back to Springfield really the big thing, the energy legislation. What on earth happened? We didn't get any.
Yeah, we have some disagreements in terms of the energy bill in general, Amanda. And first of all, thank you so much for having us tonight. I really appreciate it. We have about 85% of the topic areas agreed upon thus far, but we still have some hangups. A lot of those hangups revolve around decarbonization. And I think over the next few weeks, I think we're going to come to hopefully an agreement here on that, and then hopefully make one of the largest investments, not only in renewable infrastructure across Illinois, but saving tens of thousands of jobs across the state as well.
No. We heard a little bit about that earlier today during a Senate committee. Let's take a listen on that holdup.
Unfortunately, there's some bad news. There are a couple of matters that are hanging up the proceedings right now. One, I'll turn it over to Senator Castro in a second to talk about, involves a matter involving the payment of prevailing wage on renewable projects that I think is close to an agreement. The other problem is just been a much bigger obstacle to overwhelm, and that's agreeing on a schedule for decarbonization.
So decarbonization, Representative Williams, this is something that you and environmentalists have been advocating for, a phase out completely of coal plants. Why is that so important?
Absolutely. Amanda, we need to pass a climate bill, not a utility bill in Springfield. And I'm one of almost 50 legislators that signed a letter to our leaders, which stated unequivocally, without climate and without equity, we have no deal. So while we're very excited about the places that we found agreement and are excited to move forward with comprehensive legislation, we have to have a bill that puts communities, climate, and consumers first. And we're hopeful that we can get there.
Hopeful that you can get there. Again, no deal yet, despite the legislators being brought to the Capitol to vote on this very plan. Representative Welter, can you explain what is the point of calling a special session when there is no compromise?
Well, I think as with any negotiations, things come together and sometimes they fall apart and there's some issues. I believe that when we were intended to come back to Springfield, there was some agreement on a majority of this bill. However, as my colleagues touched on and talked about today, decarbonization seems to be the big sticking point here in terms of why I believe a bill was not passed today in the Senate. But it's a great question. I'm in the super minority, so the Democrats have a super majority in the House and the Senate. Technically, they don't need Republican votes, but to get an energy package done, as we've seen in 2016 and prior years, it's been a bipartisan effort. And that's what it's going to take ultimately to get this energy bill passed. There are so many things in it that may seem controversial to one caucus or one legislator and maybe not so much to the other. So trying to find some common ground and agreement. And I believe what our caucus, the Republicans, continue to advocate is for a green energy future. But what I would say is we just have a much different philosophy and view on how we get there compared to maybe many of our Democrat counterparts. A one-size-fits-all for Illinois is not going to work in this situation. What works in the PJM market in Northern Illinois is not going to work in Southern Illinois. And that's what I don't believe we're necessarily respecting or taking into account. But hopefully that will happen, and we need to get something done really by the end of June.
Representative Welter, what are you looking for that would be different for your parts, the area that you represent versus, say, the Chicago area?
Well, I have a very unique district in that it's the most energy intensive district in the state of Illinois. I get to represent 3 of the nuclear plants, Dresden, Braidwood, and the LaSalle station. So a lot of jobs, a lot of direct jobs at these plants, but also a lot of secondary jobs with the vendors that come into these plants and work. So that is important to me, but it should also be important to those folks like Representative Williams and others who advocate for, zero carbon or no carbon emissions. In order for Illinois to get to the goals of where we all want to go, we can't do that in the short term without nuclear. And I think there's some common agreement about that, but it's really about what support we give. And in these negotiations right now, that doesn't seem to be the sticking point. The nuclear provisions have been agreed to somewhat verbally since we left Springfield on May 31st. Again, the sticking point is the decarbonization that really targets central and southern Illinois jobs, forces closures prematurely, puts municipalities on the hook for millions, hundreds of millions of dollars in bonds. These are issues that are just unacceptable to our caucus and downstate. And I'm hearing that from a lot of downstate Democrats as well at this point.
Now, I do want to touch on these nuclear plants because, of course, a few years back, Illinois did come forward with subsidies paid for by ratepayers to keep open a pair of nuclear plants. Now, Exelon asking for money to keep open another 4 of these plants, and that would be Byron and Dresden. I'm looking at my list here. We see them. So there we go. Quad Cities and Clinton did, as you see in yellow on your screens, will have already got this ratepayer subsidy, and now Braidwood, LaSalle, Dresden, and Byron looking for a ratepayer bailout. How do you justify that at this point in time, Representative Williams, given that Exelon, at least its subsidiary ComEd, has been mired in this corruption scandal?
Well, you said it well, Amanda. We have clearly not had the appropriate oversight over the utilities prior to to this, and that's what resulted in the ongoing ComEd scandal. So I think one important foundational piece of any energy legislation deals with utility accountability and ethics provisions. That includes everything from putting an independent monitor at the ICC to monitor compliance and ethics proposals from the utilities themselves, to changing how we do rate making to eliminate automatic or formula rates. The reality is nuclear is a necessary bridge to get us to a renewable energy future. And we can't afford to continue spewing coal and carbon emissions into the air. We've got to do what we can to get those plants offline, rely on nuclear to get us to where we can be 100% renewables in the future.
Now, Senator Plummer, got to bring you in here. We've talked a lot about how the big point of contention is what is going to happen with Illinois' coal plants and when they need to be phased out. And a big one there, that Prairie plant that does provide some electricity to some of the western suburbs of Chicago, but also is based in your district. We had a bipartisan group of 52 lawmakers writing a letter this weekend opposing the closure of plants like Prairie State, saying if Prairie State and City Water, Light and Power, which is in Springfield, are prematurely shuttered, Illinois will need to import power from other states, likely from less efficient coal plants. This would transform Illinois into a net importer of dirtier power and a net exporter of jobs. So, Senator Plummer, what is your answer for the future of Prairie State?
Yeah, so well, first off, Amanda, thanks for having me on here today. This is an important conversation. You know, I think one thing we have to recognize is the fact that we're still talking about an energy bill right now shows that this is a complete failure in leadership. We have folks in Springfield that are driven by ideology instead of facts and good public policy. And the reality is, we really need to have a diverse energy base here in Illinois. We need to make sure that we are looking after the future of the state. A couple of things that I want to touch on. You know, Illinois gets a bad name in here. We have a lot of problems when it comes to attracting jobs, attracting businesses. And, you know, one of the few things that we have in our favor right now is low-cost energy and a reliable grid. We're known for that. And we have those things because of the diverse energy supply we have. Right now, we have ideologues going after nukes, going after coal, going after gas. And, you know, there's a lot of special interests involved in this conversation. My simple question is, who is in this room that's standing up for the ratepayers in Illinois? Who is in this room standing up for the working families of Illinois? Because if you go after Prairie State, if you go after the plant in Springfield, if you go after some of these other suppliers, you're going to, just like you said, be bringing in power from less efficient plants across the country. And we're actually stepping backwards instead of moving forward together. We all want to
get to that. We'll get to that more perhaps coming up. You guys will be joining us once again in just a bit, legislators. So that is where we're going to have to leave it for now. Again, we will be joined by state lawmakers later in the program to discuss the Chicago elected school board proposal, also FOID card legislation. But for now, our thanks to Senator Hastings, Representative Williams and Welter, and to Senator Plummer. And now, Brandis, we toss it back to you.
Thank you, Amanda. Chicago-based global architectural powerhouse Skidmore, Owings & Merrill designs everything from train stations to high-rises to airports. In fact, it's currently working on a redesign of the State and Lake L station downtown. But it also has its sights set beyond Chicago, beyond Earth, in fact. In collaboration with the European Space Agency and MIT, the firm has developed a design for a lunar colony grounded in science fact rather than science fiction. That design is now being showcased at the world-renowned Venice Biennale Arts Festival in Italy. Joining us now to tell us more is Georgy Petrov, Associate Director at Skidmore, Owings & Merrill, where he works as a structural engineer and at least part of the time as a space architect. Georgy, thank you so much for joining us. So, as I just mentioned, this was an initiative from the European Space Agency. How did Skidmore, Owings & Merrill come to be designing a colony for the moon?
Thank you very much for having me tonight. It's a great pleasure to share our work with you. Well, most things that have flown in space so far has been designed by engineers that start with the rocket and then put the spaceship in, and then the last thing that goes in there is the human. So we feel that an architecture firm and our way of thinking, of designing with the humans in mind first, and then wrapping the technology around them, could really contribute to how we design things for outer space. And so we were fortunate enough to be approached by the European Space Agency to collaborate with them to give form to their vision of how we could go back to the moon in a different way.
What were some of the parameters of this design project? Were you designing habitats or the entire infrastructure and ecosystem of the lunar colony?
We actually started on many different levels. We started with a master plan, sort of ideas of urbanism and how you form a community that can grow over time. We also tried to introduce a sense of placemaking, of poetry, a habitat, a human community needs not just to survive, but also an identity. Every city and every town on Earth has a landmark that the residents are proud of. We also designed one of the possible habitats, so on a scale of a single unit. And then we've also looked at some technology and our expertise of how to actually build it and put it together. So we worked on many different sort of levels.
So is what you've envisaged, is this realizable with the current technology?
Yes, we try to start with this, the idea that everything that we've designed is something that has either been tested and flown in space or it's being developed right now. And so it's, given the resources and the will, it's something that could be implemented in the near future.
How would these habitats be built? As you've been speaking, of course, we've been showing folks some of the renderings that you all have shared with us. Would they, would the materials have to be brought to the moon, or the habitats have to be brought to the moon and assembled there? What are the resources like on the moon to build them?
Well, one of the places on the moon that's been the most interesting in the last 10 years is the two poles, and particularly the southern pole. Because over the last 20 years, through many missions, both from NASA and other countries, we've kind of realized that there's a lot of resources in the southern pole. And so originally, everything that you bring would have to be brought from Earth. But the idea is that we would go to the poles because that's where there's water and resources that you could learn how to use the material there. Because even with the current sort of advancements in rocket technology, it's still very, very expensive to get to the moon. And so anything that you don't have to bring from Earth would be very welcome and used from there.
And NASA has targeted returning humans to the moon by 2024 with its Artemis mission, although most observers, of course, expect that date to be pushed back. Do you think we'll see some of these designs or variations of them on the moon in our lifetimes?
I sincerely hope so, although it's been quite a while since we've set foot there. But in the last few years, the collaboration between sort of government agencies like NASA and ESA and the private sector has given sort of new life and new hope that we could get there sustainably pretty soon.
And of course, there's the Venice Biennale. What kind of installation can visitors see if they get the chance to go to Venice this summer?
Well, the Venice Biennale topic this year is how we will live together. And the idea of our moon village is that we would go there together collaboratively and not as a competition. And so we have built our exhibit along those lines. We have a big model of the master plan. And we do have produced this video that you showed a little bit that's telling our story.
And of course, there's the Venice Biennale. What kind of installation? Okay. Georgi Petrov, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us. We're looking forward to seeing what you come up with on the moon or when it gets there.
Here is how we will live.
Up next, what to expect this season at Arlington International Racecourse. Stay with us.
Coverage of science and technology on Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Joel M. Friedman, president of the Alvin H. Baum Family Fund.
It's home to trainers, jockeys, and others in the horse racing industry. And during summer weekends, it's a place for fans to bet on their favorite racehorse. Arlington International Racecourse is officially open for what could be its last season. We stopped by for a visit on the day of the state's full reopening. Mornings at Arlington International Racecourse are quiet if you don't count the rumble of galloping horses during training. Jockey Chris Amy says those early hours are essential.
Every morning you're out here working horses, trying to get them better, keep them in shape, and then usually the crowd just comes and sees the end result. But there's months and months, sometimes years of work to get to that point for that one race.
The high speed and the adrenaline rush drew Amy to the sport after his middle school bus driver suggested that he and his twin brother Aaron give it a try.
It's so fun. I always tell everyone it's better than a real job, and there's nothing like it in the world.
Fast forward to today, and Amy has been racing at Arlington for more than 20 years, becoming the racetrack's third all-time leading rider.
It's such a beautiful track, one of the best in North America. When you win here, it doesn't matter if it's a small race, big race, you feel like you made it, especially when we have the crowd here and cheering you on. It's so loud and you can feel the energy of the people.
The park reopened on April 30th with safety precautions like limited capacity, social distancing, and sanitizing stations in place. Now, vaccinated guests can do away with face masks. But despite the good feelings, this might be the racecourse's final season.
We kind of coined this the final turn just to send the message to people to get out and come out and experience Arlington for one last time, or revisit memories that you may have of Arlington and create new memories.
One last time because Arlington's parent company Churchill Downs put the racecourse up for sale back in February. There's a chance the new owner selected by Churchill could redevelop the 326-acre property. But Petrillo says Arlington has overcome past challenges in its near 100-year history, and he believes Arlington's legacy and name will persevere.
You had the fire in 1985, and just 21 days later, rising from the ashes, was a tent city. And the Arlington Million was conducted, and it was now coined the Miracle Million. So there are a number of those circumstances where we've risen to the challenge, but it's really the people that do it and the investment that they have in Arlington.
When we stopped by on the day of the state's full reopening, fans indeed appeared invested in making the most of their time.
It's just so nice to be back. It's just so sad that it's closing. We're all like, this used to be our thing. We'd meet and come here, so it's a bummer.
A lot of people don't want to come. They think it's, because they say, well, I don't really like to bet on horse. I'm not big. And that's not what it is. This is just a place to gather, place to associate. It's a family place. You come out on Sunday on Family Day. And then when they come out, they say, that is not what I expected.
Arlington has also become a family place for Amy. It's not only where he spent the majority of his career, but also where he met his fiancée, Brittany Vandenberg. And next month, it's where they'll get married.
I just want to keep it going. I have a home here. I got a nice horse farm. We love being here, racing all year. It's more of a family-orientated place. All the jockeys and the grooms and valets, we all get along great. So we're hoping to just continue staying here instead of having to move away.
And today marks the last day for developers and investors to submit proposals to Churchill Downs for the property. You can visit our website for updates on the racecourse's future. Still to come on Chicago Tonight, legislation to create an elected school board in Chicago heads to the House. We talk with Illinois lawmakers. You've probably heard of the controversial Keystone Pipeline project, but now there's talk of a proposed pipeline outside Kankakee. Did last year's electronic scooter program deliver on spreading transit equity as planned? We'll take a look at the data. And a full year of jumping into Lake Michigan. Meet the Great Lake Jumper in the story behind the cause. But first, some more of today's top stories. Day 2 of a chemical fire burning in northern Illinois. The fire started yesterday at Chemtool, located in Rockton near the Wisconsin border. Officials say it could take 7 days to burn out as evacuations and road closures continue. Residents within a 3-mile radius have been asked to mask up as the Environmental Protection Agency monitors the situation. Here's what Fire Chief Kirk Wilson had to say today about extinguishing the 500,000 gallons of burning oil.
Once that's done and we can get the smoke plume to dissipate and we are ensure that air quality is good in the area, ground air quality, then we can start looking at bringing our residents back into our community.
And good news for travelers coming to Chicago. All U.S. states and territories are listed as yellow on the Chicago Department of Public Health's emergency travel order list. That means travelers arriving in Chicago from anywhere in the U.S. do not need to quarantine or have a negative COVID-19 test before arriving. Meanwhile, the country's COVID-19 death toll has topped 600,000, according to Johns Hopkins University. That means the number of lives lost is about equal to the number of Americans who died of cancer in 2019. The reported COVID-19 death toll worldwide stands at about 3.8 million. As the city expands its reopening, the organizers of Lollapalooza announced the official lineup of more than 50 after shows. Those will happen around town at 14 Chicago venues, which is huge news to smaller music venues that were shuttered during the pandemic. After show tickets are slated to go on sale at 10 a.m. Friday. And if Ravinia is more your speed, tickets at the historic North Shore venue are set to go on sale tomorrow for shows between July 1st and August 15th. You can only find tickets for Ravinia on their website. And now back to Amanda with more from state lawmakers. Amanda.
Thanks, Brandis. Earlier in the program, we discussed a massive energy bill stalled in Springfield. And now we are back with State Senator Hastings and State Representative Williams and Welter, also State Senator Plummer. To begin with, the governor today issued an amendatory veto on the budget. This had to fix a whole lot of afters that would have meant some of the budget otherwise wouldn't have gone into effect until a year from now. Senator Hastings, how could something like this have happened?
Oh, Amanda, just like the telecommunications bill, sometimes there's errors the Scrivener's errors as a whole. Whether that's dates, whether that's a one word or two words here or there that require corrections. Today in the Senate, we voted to pass a revised version of that to correct those errors. So from time to time this happens. So we did it on the telecommunications bill. There was a minor error that affected the entire bill. So, sometimes when you realize a problem, the responsible thing to do is to correct it. And that's what we did today.
Representative Welter, any response to that? Might this have to do with the quick fashion in which the budget was drafted, proposed, voted on?
Yeah, it's a common complaint of ours. You get a bill that's hundreds of pages long and dropped on you a couple hours before you're expected to vote on it. It's a terrible process. It's not a good way to legislate, and things like this happen. But when you're busy sneaking in legislators' pay raises, you're not too concerned sometimes about some of the other details. And that's what we ran into here. We're here, though. The Democrats have the votes. And if they all show up for work tomorrow, we could pass it out of the House.
Now, what of those pay raises? These are something that we've been hearing about. I believe it's about $2,000 extra a year. Representative Williams, do legislators deserve that? Why not?
Well, as you may be aware, there is litigation ongoing as to how legislators' pay is treated. So I think that issue is under consideration right now by the courts, and it will be interesting and helpful to see what the courts advise us in order to move forward. I'm certainly open to looking at a different process for that, but right now what we have in the Constitution is how we're doing it. And I think, like I said, the court should be weighing in on this, and we'll take direction from the courts.
And Amanda, if I could maybe there just intercept. I come from local government, and we're governed by the same statutes of the Illinois Constitution on elected officials, compensation and pay not being changed during a current term. Our locals, whether it's aldermen, county board members, they vote on those compensations before the new boards are elected, just as state statute calls for. It'd be pretty simple for the Illinois General Assembly to throw up on the board right now, prior to the next election cycle, that those legislators will either get a pay freeze. The way it's set up in statute now, though, it's automatic. So we could at any time produce legislation, put it forward. Unfortunately, the majority at this point has chosen not to do that.
Representative Williams, I want to go back to you. It's something that the House is expected to be voting on tomorrow, not an energy bill per se, but the CPS elected school board legislation. What are you hearing from your constituents? How do you plan to vote?
Well, I will be supporting the elected school board bill, as I have several times in the past. It's passed the House probably at least 3 times over the course of the past 4 or 5 years. There's a couple points. First of all, the Chicago School Board is the only school board in the state that is not elected, and we're one of very few major cities that have a non-elected school board. Secondly, I think it's important to keep in mind the way we're structuring this bill ensures that all parts of the city are truly represented. So that is why we looked at the structure that we did. And finally, this is one of the few items where I've actually got some real data as to where my constituents stand. There have been at least 2 electoral referenda on this issue, and both have showed support upwards of 85%. So I will be in support.
House also expected to vote on legislation that would pave the way for quicker processing of firearm owners' identification cards, not mandating fingerprinting, but if you want to get a speedier FOID card, then you would have to give your fingerprints. Senator Plummer, what are your thoughts on that measure, as if the House passes it, it would go to Governor J.B. Pritzker's desk?
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's pretty simple. That's not a fix that's going to satisfy gun owners. We're making law-abiding citizens jump through extra hoops when they're just trying to exercise their constitutional right. If we want to fix the FOID, we can just get rid of the FOID, and we can take all of those state police resources and get them out on the street and go after the crime that we know is ravaging our community. This isn't a real solution.
And we might have lost you there. Let's go. I want to be sure to get a better idea. We talked a lot about energy when we initially were chatting, but bringing back to that, again, this massive package, a lot of expectations. Does everybody on this panel believe that an energy package is going to pass before Exelon makes good on its threats of closing nuclear plants? There's also renewable jobs at stake. Is something going to happen? Can I get a quick yes or no from each of you? Senator Hastings.
Yeah, I hope so. I spent the last 3 years working on it, Amanda, and I'll just tell you right now, when it comes down to it, this is going to be the most substantial package of investment in renewable energy, and it'll preserve our position as a leader in the entire country. Our decarbonization plan, whether it's the plan that we have as our working group, is probably the most aggressive decarbonization plan while maintaining people's jobs. When it comes to nuclear fleet, I'll just tell you right now, coming off of COVID, losing 28,000 jobs is not acceptable to me. It's just not.
Representative Williams, is this going to happen?
You know, it needs to happen. We are poised to pass one of the most nation-leading comprehensive climate bills that's been seen. And it has to happen for climate, for jobs, and for recovery from COVID.
Hearing that it has to happen, but hasn't yet. Representative Welter?
I'm cautiously optimistic.
All
I
right.
think that...
And sorry, we'll leave it there. Senator Plummer, real quick.
Yeah, no, I think we need to make sure that we've got someone there representing the ratepayers. And right now, I'm not convinced that they're going to get everybody at the table.
You're not ready to go for it. All right. Well, thank you very much.
For the last few weeks, he's more than invited to attend.
You're welcome to come on in.
You're welcome to
You
join
know,
us.
what we're really doing with this energy bill is we're creating a new ethics nightmare in Springfield, because why are we not applying the same rules and the same ethics requirements to the renewables that we are to the nukes and the utilities? I mean, we need transparency in this process, and we
will continue to try and be as transparent as possible by having conversations here on Chicago Tonight. I'm afraid we do have to leave it there. Our thanks to Senator Hastings and Representatives Williams and Welter, also to Senator Plummer. And now to Phil Ponce with a controversial pipeline proposal. Phil?
Amanda, a bill heading to Governor J.B. Pritzker's desk is causing controversy in a village outside of Kankakee. The bill would provide funding for a proposed natural gas pipeline for the village of Hopkins Park in Pembroke Township. Supporters say the pipeline could provide economic growth for the area, but there are concerns about the environmental impact, particularly in an area that was once the largest black farming community in the northern United States. Joining us with more are Mark Hodge, he's the mayor of the village of Hopkins Park, Republican State Representative Jackie Haas, who sponsored the bill, and Naomi Davis, the founder and president of Blacks in Green. That is a group that advocates for sustainable living in African American communities. And thank you so much for joining us. First of all, Mayor Hodge, what exactly would the pipeline do?
Well, the pipeline would bring industry to our community. It would grow our community in a way that it has not seen before. meaning it would bring jobs. Jobs would bring families to the community. Families would bring their children, and it would expand our school system, which has been depressed for quite some time, as we've been left behind for many decades. People have in Springfield have recognized that our community has been left behind, and they want to modernize our community just like every community around us has been modernized.
Naomi Davis, it sounds like the mayor's point is that it would basically catch things up, that this is a community that is, according to a spokesperson for Rainbow Push, experiencing energy poverty. How do you see it?
The representation that there will be a pipeline that will bring jobs is just a fiction. The entire South Cook County is replete with Black communities fueled by natural gas, which are experiencing economic depression right now. And how many times have Black communities heard over and over and over again that something was going to bring jobs? We are experienced enough to know, and especially those of us in the clean energy field, that there is no silver bullet that are going to bring jobs, and industry does not come to communities without broadband, without any kind of police, fire, or other protections against NICOR leaks, which are legend.
Representative Jackie Haas, why did you think it was a project that merited your support?
Sure. So thank you, Phil. I'm a lifelong resident of Kankakee County and of this district. And I actually grew up in the neighboring town next to Pembroke Township. And this has been a decades-long issue for this community, and really for as long as I can remember. This is an initiative that was also worked on by my predecessor. And I have to tell you, I am so excited that this bill has had such wonderful bipartisan support, not just on the local level, but it was also well evidenced in both the House and in the Senate chambers, as it passed both with overwhelming bipartisan support.
Naomi Davis, the fact is that it did pass with overwhelming bipartisan support. Does that speak to the merits of the project in your mind?
Let me speak to the deceit that it represents. Really, really good people were misled in a campaign of miseducation. Southern Company and NICOR ought to be ashamed of themselves for the quality of the reporting, the community engagement, the information, the engineering, the convenings that should have been held. And we know from our experience what community engagement is. There's no evidence in any public records, and we are FOIA-ing them, that there has been any meaningful, substantial, or accurate community engagement happening over a few years process. And I'll tell you something else. It was at the 13th hour, after midnight, after the session of the legislature was officially over, that we had worked so hard and valiantly and won the opportunity to pull the bill from the roll call. There was a 13th hour deal after many legislators had agreed that it was not the right thing at the right time, and that renewable energy in Pembroke was the way to go. Look, let me show you something. Renewable Pembroke. There is a campaign, and there has been a campaign for a long time against pipelines in Pembroke. We are not stopping. We're going to the governor. We are expecting to request an amendatory veto, because we understand the very thin margin of opinion that separates a bad bill, a good bill, and its passing.
Let's get the mayor back. Let's get the mayor back in this. And Mr. Mayor, describe physically what the pipeline is going to do. How big is it going to be, and it's going to connect what to what?
Well, essentially, the pipeline is going to come down our main and central avenues and give us an opportunity, just like they have in every community around us, to bring industry to the community. But first of all, I'd like to say that 97% 97% of the people that completed surveys that live in the village of Hopkins Park in Pembroke Township, 93%, said yes to natural gas.
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor, what I'm really asking is how many people are going to be connected to this natural gas pipeline? How extensive is it? What are we talking about?
On the initial phase, we're looking at 400 homes. But to get back to my point, 97% of the people in the village of Hopkins Park and 93% of the people in Pembroke Township said yes to natural gas. The people that are saying no to natural gas live in Chicago, and they enjoy natural gas. And the people in Pembroke and Hopkins Park want to enjoy the same clean energy. We have used wood, fuel oil, and propane for decades. It is time to modernize this community. It is time for people that are standing in the way to move to the side. The people in Springfield, the House, and the floor clearly understand that we have been held back, intentionally or not. We have been, and they understand that we needed to move forward. The representatives tried to pull this bill at the last minute of the last hour, where we had to have 60 votes before 12 o'clock. They made sure the bill was called after 12 o'clock when 71 votes were needed.
Inaccurate.
Excuse me. Let's not get into the weeds on that one. Naomi Davis, as we mentioned, this was once the largest black farming community in the northern United States. What are the potential implications for African American farmers in the area?
It is a globally rare 3-biome ecology in Pembroke, which farmers for hundreds of years have been actively and intentionally conserving against the intrusions, 4 times resisting a gas pipeline coming to the community. We understand that there are 24 documented cases of NICOR gas leaks at a $500 million cost. There was an expose on WCIA TV that clearly pointed out the clear and present danger. NICOR is under investigation by the Illinois Attorney General's Office for safety incursions. And so when we talk about what we know about conserving the land, we are talking about a culture that is looking to continue its traditions. It's the longest continuously occupied African-founded town in the state of Illinois, an underground railroad stronghold, a leading black farming stronghold in the country. And by the way, the gerrymandering of the votes, and frankly, it's insulting that every time Mayor Hodge speaks, he has a different statistic that he cites for how many people voted. And a Representative Haas herself admitted on the call that she was adjusting.
Excuse me, Ms. Davis, we're almost out of time. We're almost out of time, and I'd like to get Representative Haas in here for the closing comment. The bill is on the governor's desk. Are you confident that the governor is going to sign it?
I am confident that the governor will sign it. This is a great bill. It's a great thing for this community. This community has been asking for this, and they've been waiting for this utility service for decades. And to ask them to wait any longer, let's be honest, they've been waiting long enough, and it would be a disservice to this community and would only marginalize them any further to continue to make them wait. There have been no deals made in this bill to get it onto the governor's desk. And I do feel confident that he will do the right thing and sign this.
And that's where we'll have to leave it. Naomi Davis, Representative Jackie Haas, and Mayor Mark Hodge, we appreciate you being here. Thank you so much, all of you.
Thank you. Future of gas in Illinois.
And up next, will Chicago's e-scooter program become permanent? Stay with us for more.
Don't ever miss Chicago Tonight. Subscribe to our podcast. Get a daily download of our show delivered to your desktop or mobile device. Go to WTTW.com/Chicago Tonight podcast and subscribe.
Last year's electronic scooter program, which ran from August to December, saw an increase in scooters provided, but a decline in overall ridership. Those are some of the findings of a Chicago Department of Transportation report examining the city's 2020 e-scooter program. While some officials discuss a possible permanent e-scooter program, some members of City Council are raising safety concerns about the swift modes of transport. Joining us now with more are Alex Perez, Advocacy Manager of the nonprofit Active Transportation Alliance, and John Greenfield, co-editor of Streets Blog Chicago and transportation columnist for the Chicago Reader. Welcome back to Chicago Tonight. Alex Perez, let's start with you, please. What were your biggest takeaways from CDOT's report of the 2020 program?
Yeah, thank you for having me. One of the big takeaways that I saw was the trips replacements that the scooters were doing. So 30% of the trips replaced by scooters were pretty much either going to be driving or using ride-hail. And it also replaced a lot of walking trips. So for that, you could see that people are interested in using scooters to get around Chicago as an efficient way and cheaper way than driving or taking a ride-hail.
John Greenfield, how about you? What were your biggest takeaways?
Well, the remarkable thing about last year's pilot was that even though there were a lot more scooters, there was a 10,000 scooter cap compared to 2,500 in 2019. And a much larger service area. In 2019, it was only 50 square miles, just the west and northwest sides. Last year, it was basically the entire city except for the loop and the near north side. There were actually fewer rides taken last year. There were 665,000 rides taken in 2019, but only 540,000 rides taken last year. So that's kind of, that's sort of puzzling. Like, if this program expanded so much, why were there fewer rides?
And John, to that point, do you think the pandemic was the primary reason for that decrease in rides?
Yeah, that definitely was a factor. I mean, people weren't really using the scooters for work commutes much, I would guess, or at least much less. Fewer people were going to downtown office jobs. A couple other possible factors were that Divvy rolled out their new electric bikes, which was a very successful program. Divvy had four of its busiest months ever last year during the summer and fall. And so that probably stole some of the thunder from e-scooters. That there was another way that you could go fast on a micromobility device. And then there's also just the factor that in 2019 scooters were new, whereas last year they were kind of old hat. So there weren't that many people just taking for joyrides just to see what it was like.
And Alex, the city did make an effort to expand this form of transit to the south and west sides, as John just mentioned, with, it had a greater radius. Data shows that almost a quarter, about 23% of trips were taken within the equity priority area. What does that tell you? Does that prove that the initiative was a success?
It was a good initiative. It's definitely positive to increase the range where the scooters could be placed, and especially bringing it down to the south and west sides, where transit options aren't as good, and as well as kind of with the priority. Another thing that could be done is pretty much the street conditions. When it comes to the expansion, a lot of the streets in the south and west sides aren't really the safest streets for people to be riding a scooter on. There's a lot of high speeds, a lot of big trucks that are in the area, and there's really not much of bike lanes or protected bike lanes that could keep people safe riding on the street. Or on the streets as they're going to a sidewalk.
John Greenfield, the city said that the e-scooter related complaints to 311 decreased in 2019. Do you think that the public sort of acclimated to the scooters? Because obviously last year there was that requirement that meant that scooters had to be locked to something. Is that the contributing factor here?
No, there was a very concrete reason why the complaints went down. And that's actually something that Streets Blog Chicago advocated for, is in 2019, there were plenty of issues with vandalism of scooters. There was even a feed called, I think, Chicago Scooter Fails. There was just funny pictures of scooters hanging from trees and in fountains and stuff. And also just scooters being parked improperly, blocking sidewalks. So those were things that really annoyed people. So we advocated for having a lock-to rule, which means that the scooters have to have a built-in lock and a requirement that when you park the scooter, you have to lock it to a fixed object like a parking meter or a sign pole or a bike rack. And so the city of Chicago took our advice on that. I mean, we probably weren't the only reason they did that. But they did pass that rule, and because of that, I think problems with sidewalk clutter and vandalism were much less last year.
Alex, some aldermen recently, though, expressed opposition to a proposed permanent scooter program, citing safety concerns as well as a desire to have maybe the scooters docked together with the divvy bikes. What is your assessment of this opposition to a permanent program?
Ultimately, when it comes to bringing in a permanent program, it should really be about making sure that the safety is pretty much being the #1 issue when it comes to bringing in more scooters, especially when it comes to crashes or potential crashes. So I feel like the aldermen, especially the aldermen that don't want scooters in their wards, it impacts the full city if the program gets shut down, when it has been proven that some wards pretty much would benefit from scooters coming into the full city.
John, your thoughts? What's your assessment of this opposition and what the aldermen are saying?
Yeah, I mean, I was saying earlier that I think it's pretty analogous to the reaction to divvy stations. In some neighborhoods, people have viewed divvy stations as a bit of a nuisance, like something that creates loitering, or, we've had problems with divvy thefts, so people are worried that, divvy stations are going to be a crime generator. But then other people in those communities have pointed out that divvy is a resource. It's something that helps people get to work, get physical activity, get to school. So, if we don't provide divvy stations in all neighborhoods, people are really missing out. So the same thing goes with scooters. There's potential for people to misuse them, but there's also a lot of potential for scooters to, help get people where they need to go and help fill holes in the transportation network and the transit network and improve transit equity. So
more to come.
Therefore, I don't think we should cave to aldermen who don't want scooters in their wards.
All right, that's where we'll have to leave it. My thanks to Alex Perez and John Greenfield for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Well, he did it. Last weekend, Dan O'Connor, a man also known as the Great Lake Jumper, completed his 365th consecutive jump into Lake Michigan. Every day for a full year, O'Connor leapt into the lake to raise money for local music venues. On this special day, there he goes, local legend Jeff Tweedy of the indie rock band Wilco played him out. More than 100 jumps ago, Chicago Tonight's Evan Garcia met up with the Great Lake Jumper to see him swim in decidedly colder waters last February. Here's another look.
It's a chilly morning in late February, and Dan O'Connor is planning his exit strategy.
I probably spent about 20-25 minutes with a shovel and mostly a hammer, just chipping away at the ice so I had a clear path back out to the ladder.
Dan is doing something most people find unthinkable this time of year, plunging into Lake Michigan. The water temperature today, 33 degrees. Dan says this is the 259th straight day he's jumped in the lake. He says it all began with a headache back in June.
I started doing it because I was hungover the first day, and it felt so good to be, out in the lake, kind of wash away all the stuff that was happening in America at the time, between the pandemic and the politics and the protests and the unrest, and it just felt like a good, clean start to the day.
Dubbing himself the Great Lake Jumper, Dan has gained an incredulous audience online while filming his jumps from various lakefront locations. Dan says his daily diving routine helps him cope with the disappearance of live music during the pandemic. Before COVID-19 shut down Chicago's live music scene, Dan sold hand-stenciled custom clothing from music venues like this one, Metro in the Wrigleyville neighborhood.
Doing this for about close to 15 years. For the first, say 6-8 years, I was doing it for friends and family at festivals. I'd pick, hey, there's 100 bands on the festival. I'd pick my favorite 10. I'd, cut a stencil and spray paint 10 shirts, give them out to, wear one and give them 9 out to my friends and family.
While he works full-time as a bus driver in the north suburbs, selling homemade shirts has been a successful side hustle for Dan. A few years ago, he was invited to sell his clothing at Lollapalooza's official pop-up store.
How you feeling? Feeling great. Toes are a little cold, but...
With in-person concerts still on hold, Dan is trying to raise money for Civil, an organization formed by 14 of the city's independent music venues.
Kind of directing people, hey, if you like this content online, of me jumping in the lake for, 259 days today in a row, then, donate to there.
Sometimes local acts like Cielito Lindo accompany him with music.
Just trying to get, a different genres, different instruments of people to show the breadth of Chicago.
And a warning to any daring divers looking to follow Dan's lead. Plunging into cold water can cause cold shock or involuntary gasping that can lead to drowning, according to the National Weather Service. A life jacket is recommended.
I have some serene moments, and I think also part of it is diving in and that shock to the body that, you get this kind of full body buzz, that those endorphins released.
For Chicago Tonight, I'm Evan Garcia.
And after a full year, Dan says he took his first day off from jumping into Lake Michigan on Sunday. He plans to continue his lakefront habit, although not every day. And that's our show for this Tuesday night. Please join us tomorrow night live at 7. State lawmakers meet tomorrow in Springfield. Our Spotlight Politics team breaks it down. And Game of Thrones author George R.R. Martin on his time at Northwestern and how Chicago influenced his work. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman. Thanks for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a personal injury law firm serving Chicago for 37 years.